Thank you everyone for tuning in to another one of my videos. Today we're going to tackle the topic of, are Americans being hypocrites when it comes down to this whole Ukraine war thing, okay? Well, we're going to talk about this today, and I'm going to start off by just giving you guys a little bit of history. So in 1917, there was this revolution in Russia called the October Revolution. It's when Lenin and the Bolsheviks overthrew the government in Russia, and then in 1922 the Soviet Union was born. It started. So if you look at Russian history, yeah, it goes back many years, and it's got a rich, colorful history, but the history of the USSR, or the Soviet Union, is really not that old. It started in my grandparents' lifetime. So the Soviet Union was formed, and then the Great Depression hit after the 1929 stock market crash, and the Great Depression covered the entire world. It wasn't just an American phenomenon, right? There were people with hardships all over the world. And so after World War II sparked off, the Nazis invaded Poland and then Austria and so on. During World War II, the Nazis reneged on a contract with Stalin and actually invaded Russia, invaded the Soviet Union, and got them into the war, which actually turned out to be a good thing, because if it wasn't for Russia entering the war and fighting the Nazis on the Eastern Front while the U.S. and her allies were fighting on the Western Front, it could have turned out a lot different, or at least the war could have drug on a lot longer than it did. So during World War II, the Soviet Union was actually a benefit to the Allies, to the Western world. I would even say they were an ally to a degree. But after World War II, there became this whole deal. There became this big superpower, who's going to be the big guy on the block, right? And guys, I apologize for using my layman's Oklahoma working class terms. I don't know any other way to talk. That's how I speak. I know it's not the best educated, but that's how I say things. And hopefully you guys can relate to this. And the reason I'm going back into some of the history, because I firmly believe a lot of Americans absolutely don't know any of this stuff. They've never looked back and seen where the Soviet Union even came from. Or there's probably a younger generation out there that doesn't even know about the Soviet Union. They just know about Putin's Russia. But there's been a lot more than that. And so that's why I'm going back to some of this history, okay? And so getting back to that, so now we've got the Cold War beginning. Started in the late 40s, the early 50s. So we both start, the Soviet Union and the United States, we start building up our militaries. We have both discovered nuclear weapons at this point in time, and we're building up our nuclear arsenals to basically destroy the entire world if that ever sparks off, right? So it was in 1961 that the United States put medium-range nuclear missiles, Jupiter missiles, in Turkey. Well, if you look at a map and you see how close Turkey is to Moscow, Russia, it's not that far away, y'all. So, yes, the Russians became very concerned. The Soviets became very concerned. And so what did Khrushchev do? That was the premier of the Soviet Union back then. He put missiles in Cuba, and it started off a little thing called the Cuban Missile Crisis. And in 1963, this became a big deal with John F. Kennedy as our president. Luckily, cooler heads prevailed, and Kennedy was able to get in some back channel conversations with Khrushchev, and they came to an agreement. The public agreement was that, okay, the Soviets would pull their missiles out of Cuba, and in order for the United States not to attack Cuba. But really, the back agreement that they had was that, okay, the Soviets will pull their missiles out of Cuba if the United States pulls their missiles out of Turkey. And that's what we did. So the United States soon after that pulled our Jupiter missiles out of Turkey. So now let's jump up in history to whenever I was a teenager, back in the 1980s, right? Actually, I was a little more than a teenager. In 1989, I was in college at the University of Oklahoma, right? And I was actually taking some Russian courses. Don't hold that against me. I was just curious about, hey, they were our big adversary, right? I mean, what did Reagan call them? The axis of evil and all this kind of stuff. So I was curious about that. Well, actually, my professor was Ukrainian. That's the irony of it. Her family had defected from the Soviet Union. But anyway, that's a topic for another day. So we look at 89 and we start seeing the crumbling of the Eastern Bloc, of the Soviet Union and all the republics of the Soviet Union. And basically what it was is they were countries like Poland and Hungary and the Ukraine and Georgia and all these different other countries that they had basically taken over. But they were under the influence of the Soviet Union, and they all considered themselves to be part of the Warsaw Pact. The Warsaw Pact was an agreement that was made in Warsaw, Poland, basically saying that they would all band together, and it was their version of NATO. So anyway, that was going on, but we started seeing the crumbling of the Eastern Bloc in 1989 when, like you see this video here, Reagan says,
Mr. Gorbachev, tear down this wall.
And that's exactly where it all started. The Soviet Union was starting to crumble too. We just didn't know how bad, but everybody wanted to see a reunification of Germany. There's probably a lot of the younger generation that might be watching this video that didn't even realize that Germany was split into two different countries. One was, West Germany, and then the other was East Germany. And of course, you can probably ascertain real quickly where their influences were. The Soviets controlled East Germany, and the Western world was very influential in West Germany. And the United States actually wanted Germany to become part of NATO. And these were some of the talks. Well, the Russians, the Soviets, they weren't going to just lay down and take this. They had to have some reassurances because they knew at this point their system was crumbling, and so they really didn't have any way of really fighting this too hard. Now, could they have launched nuclear missiles and ended the world at that point? Yes, they could, and we also knew that too. So our politicians of the day had to tread very, very lightly on this. And there was politicians from the United States, from the UK, all over the world, all over the Western world that was actually doing a very good job to handle this whole very sensitive situation that was going on. And so we actually did see the final demise of the Soviet Union in 1991. So it was just a few years after that the Soviet Union actually fell and became what we see now is just Russia. And so the Soviet Union and her republics started disbanding, and that'll become important as I go on in this story. I want you to remember this, but the Soviet Union and all the republics, all the countries that the Soviet Union had influence over, all just kind of disbanded. And many of these ended up inevitably becoming members of NATO. But let's read a few things about this. And like I was saying, the politicians of the day were making promises and they were trying to make reassurances to the Soviets that, hey, we don't want NATO. Now that the Cold War is over, we want NATO to just be more like the UN, I guess, or the European Union of sorts. It's not going to really be, an organization that's going to fight the Soviet Union. That's not what we're here for anymore. I mean, the Cold War is over. And that's what we were trying to tell the Soviet Union, right? So in 1990, during these talks, and guys, I'm going to look down here and read this because I've got to. In 1990, Vice Chancellor of West Germany, Greshner, met with British Foreign Minister Douglas Hurd, and he told Douglas Hurd that the Russians are going to need to have some reassurances, some assurances that NATO is not going to be expanded. And so there was a lot of talk about this of, look, we're not going to expand NATO. I'm going to read you an excerpt that comes from the National Security Archives. And I'm just going to read this because I can't really say it any better, okay? Not once, but 3 times, James Baker, who was Secretary of State, tried out the not 1 inch eastward formula with Gorbachev in the February 9th, 1990 meeting. He agreed with Gorbachev's statements in response to the assurances that NATO expansion is unacceptable. James Baker assured Gorbachev that neither the President nor I intend to extract any unilateral advantages from the processes that are taking place, and that the Americans understood that not only for the Soviet Union but for other European countries as well, it is important to have guarantees that if the United States keeps its presence in Germany within the framework of NATO, not an inch of NATO's present military jurisdiction will spread in an eastward direction. And so we gave Gorbachev, in those days, we gave him all kinds of reassurances. In this expert, it says that James Baker, uttered these things or uttered something similar 3 different times, making these assurances, right? Well, now let's take a look and fast forward on into history and see what actually happened with NATO expansion. So in the 1990s, following the fall of the Berlin Wall and the dissolution of the Warsaw Pact, many Eastern European countries, including the Czech Republic, Hungary, and Poland, became eligible for NATO membership. In 2004, 7 new countries, including 3 Baltic states, Estonia, Latvia, and Lithuania, joined NATO, marking the first accession of NATO by former Soviet republics. In 2009, Albania and Croatia joined. In 2017, Montenegro joined. In 2020, North Macedonia joined. In 2023, Finland joined, becoming the 31st member. And in 2024, Sweden became the 32nd member. So, tell me, has the United States kept her word? Have we kept our word about this? Have we tried to uphold those reassurances that our politicians gave Gorbachev and the Soviets back in those days? No, we have not. So let's take a look at some of these treaties that we entered into with Russia and the former Soviet Union after the fall of the Soviet Union. So in 1991, the START 1 treaty was signed by President George H.W. Bush and Mikhail Gorbachev. And START 1 stands for the Strategic Arms Reduction Treaty. It was signed in 1991 and it entered into force in 1994 after Ukraine, Belarus, Kazakhstan, and Russia became parties to it. START 1 expired in 2009 and was replaced by the START 2 treaty, or the New START treaty. And it was signed in Prague, Czech Republic in 2010 by U.S. President Barack Obama and Russian President Dmitry Medvedev, and entered into force February 5th, 2011. In 2023, Russia announced that it was suspending the implementation of the New START agreement, citing U.S. actions in the Ukraine war. Okay, guys, now that we have some history covered about this, so we've looked at the beginning of the Soviet Union, You know, how the United States has been pushing our weapons closer and closer and closer to the Soviet borders and the Russian borders, how we've expanded NATO. And why would we expand NATO like we did? Well, a lot of it's for money, because anytime a member nation becomes a part of NATO, well, now we have to have all of our weaponry, we have to have a common weaponry. Well, who makes the majority of that weaponry? The United States of America. It's just like if you look at 223 ammo, right? Well, you got 223 ammo, and then you got 5.56, right? NATO. Well, it's all been manufactured so that it's a common ammunition for all the members of NATO. And this is common throughout a lot of the weaponry that goes on. So it's been a huge money-making deal for the United States military-industrial complex. Okay, let's take a look at this video of Putin speaking here. And this was the most current video that I could find of him talking about the terms of a ceasefire.
Эти условия очень простые. Украинские войска должны быть полностью выведены из Донецкой, Луганской народных республик, Херсонской и Запорожской областей. Причем, обращаю внимание, именно со всей территории этих регионов в пределах их административных границ, которые существовали на момент их вхождения в Украину. Как только в Киеве заявят о том, что готовы к такому решению и начнут реальный вывод войск из этих регионов, а также официально уведомят об отказе от планов вступления в НАТО, с нашей стороны незамедлительно, буквально в ту же минуту, последует приказ прекратить огонь и начать переговоры.
Putin's really never changed his tune, okay? He's never really changed his tune about the conditions of a ceasefire. You know, a lot of people accuse him of a lot of things, but he hasn't changed his tune, not like the United States has on a lot of things. He's still, his biggest concern is still Ukraine's ability to join NATO. He wants reassurances that the Ukraine will not join NATO. Okay? I'm not a fan of Putin. Putin is a dictator. He has his political enemies killed. I mean, we all know that. These are common things. I'm not trying to say Putin is a saint and the United States are the demons here. I'm just saying we need to look at the entire picture when we look at this whole Ukraine incident. And we need to look at the history and put that in perspective to see why Putin might be a little bit concerned of eastward expansion of NATO, right? I get it. He probably sees that a lot of this is done for money too, but it's still putting arms and it's putting nations right on his border that are very hostile towards him. So I can see where he's coming from. Do I agree with what he's done? No, absolutely not. He invaded the Ukraine. That's wrong. But one of the first things he did was he invaded Crimea. That was the big port he needed to have for the Russian Navy. They have other ports that are up north that get iced in, and they're good for submarines and things like that, but they're not good for surface ships. And this is one of the only southern ports that, you know, Russia can launch any kind of ships or warships or even just commercial freight into all during all times of the year, right? So it's important for them. So he took that. Do I agree with it? No. And so after that, we started seeing the Ukraine and Russia starting to enter into the Minsk Accords or the Minsk Agreements. And these were a series of talks and agreements that were decided upon. We've even had members of other European countries that have agreed with them, that said, okay, yeah, this looks good or whatever. But it was these were done to try to thwart a full-scale invasion of Ukraine. Now, we had already at this point seen the Russians not just encroach in on Crimea, but they've also encroached in the Donbass regions and things like that, right? and he was still holding ground there. We saw these rebel troops, or whatever they called them. It was this operation, special operation that Putin talked about. Was it right? No, but it was happening. And so the Minsk agreements were there to stop any further advancement of Russian troops and to basically call a ceasefire. And the biggest part of that was still, hey, we have got, Putin's saying we've got to have assurances that the Ukraine will not join NATO. A lot of people will say, well, they're a sovereign nation. They should have the liberty to do whatever they want. Well, we'll talk about that point here in just a little bit. So in 2022, Kiev and Moscow, it looked like they were about ready to sign the latest Minsk agreements, the Minsk Accords, to thwart any further incursion into Ukraine, right? And to stop a escalation of this war, of this special military deal, however you want to put it, right? It was a war, in order to save some lives. Well, what did the United States do? And guys, I'm going to mention presidents' names, right? Joe Biden, he sent Boris Johnson from the Ukraine over to torpedo the talks. He told Zelensky to tear up the accords and not sign them, and that's exactly what happened. And so, yeah, we've seen a lot of the United States being real instrumental in a lot of this stuff. And we're talking about a lot of this stuff because I'm going to turn the tables on you guys in here just a minute, but we still got further to talk about in this. And so after the Minsk agreements were not signed by Zelensky, that's when a full-blown invasion in 2022 began. And we're seeing the big-time invasion of what we're currently in right now. Now, why would the West do this? Why would they go and have the talks torpedoed? Well, I don't know, guys. I'm no politician. I don't have all the inner workings, but it looks, if you follow the money, it looks like, well, they wanted this war. If you look at what was going on, the military-industrial complex the U.S. military-industrial complex is actually making a ton of money off this. And so let's look at a couple of different clips here.
One of the things that happens with defense contracting more than any other contracting with the federal government is something called a cost-type contract. The contractor is reimbursed for any what they call reasonable cost plus some kind of profit.
So if the government wants to build a new military aircraft like the F-35, it will pay a private company to design and manufacture it, and all the costs that go along with the project.
They then have no incentive to reduce costs because they know they're going to be reimbursed, and then on top of that, there's a profit built in that the government will pay.
Since 2001, government spending on private military contractors has tripled, despite evidence that contractors aren't always using taxpayer dollars wisely. To find out exactly what companies are doing with this money, we talked to someone on the inside.
And I work at a major U.S. defense contractor. These defense contractors, they're there to make a profit, bottom line.
The defense industry is controlled by 5 main companies, siphoning billions of dollars from the government every year. These companies regularly outperform the S&P 500 and have profit margins between 9 and 20%.
Now that doesn't seem like a lot when you're just looking at it percentage-wise, but when you're talking about billions of dollars, that is a ton of money.
So guys, as you can see, the military-industrial complex has made a lot of money off this wartime production. Now let's look at this clip from Senator McConnell, and he explains further, what we're doing over there, why we would torpedo the talks. And he really lets the cat out of the bag on this one.
If you look at the Ukraine assistance, let's talk about where the money's really going. A significant portion of it's being spent in the United States, in 38 different states, replacing the weapons that we sent to Ukraine with more modern weapons. So we're rebuilding our industrial base.
That's what President Biden's seeking to do.
It's correct. No Americans are getting killed in Ukraine. We're rebuilding our industrial base. The Ukrainians are destroying the army of one of our biggest rivals. I have a hard time finding anything wrong with that. I think it's wonderful that they're defending themselves. And also the notion that the Europeans are not doing enough. They've done almost $90 billion. They're housing a bunch of refugees who escaped. I think that our NATO allies in Europe have done quite a lot.
So guys, what more do we need to say on this topic? It looks again like the billionaires are making a ton of money off the taxpayers' money, the American workers' taxpayers' money, and a lot of that money didn't even make it over there. It was made right in the United States. Now the arms made it over there, or the weaponry made it over there to the Ukrainians, but most of that was benefiting the military-industrial complex. And what does Mitch McConnell say about this? So we can rebuild the industrial base. Rebuild the industrial base. So now let's fast forward up to current times. I've got a little clip for you here.
Of the war.
You're not in a good position. You don't have the
the
cards right now. With us, you start having
not playing
cards.
cards.
But right now, you don't.
I'm
Yeah,
very
you're playing
serious,
cards.
Mr. President.
You're
I'm
playing
very
cards.
serious.
You're
I'm
gambling
the
with the
president
lives
in
of
war.
millions of people.
You think-
You're gambling with World War
What do you-
III.
what do you
You're
speak
gambling
about?
with
What do you
World
speak
War
about?
III.
A lot of us have seen this video of the big fight in the White House and the Oval Office between Zelensky and Trump and Vance. And yeah, it wasn't pretty. It wasn't pretty. But a lot of you guys may be going, well, you know, why are we having this big fight? Well, again, we can follow the money. I watch a lot of news on this, and one thing that I see from both sides, from liberal media to conservative media, is very few people actually ever talk about this rare earth minerals deal that Trump wants to make. He's trying to make a business deal out of this whole thing. And so Trump is saying that, yeah, we have sent Ukraine over $500 billion, and they need to repay us for that. I'm not totally against the Ukraine repaying the United States, but get your figures straight and figure out how much actually went to Ukraine. Now, Mitch McConnell says earlier, right, that a lot of that money was spent inside the United States for our military-industrial complex. Now, were we sending a lot of these all this weaponry over to Ukraine? Yeah. Should they reimburse us for some of that? Totally agree with that. That's only the right thing to do. But we shouldn't be trying to play let's make a deal about rare earth minerals and trying to get this tremendous deal, which is way more than we gave them out of this whole scenario, right? And so if you look at really what happened is, you know, we sent Marco Rubio to talk to the Russians without Zelensky in Saudi Arabia. That's what happened first. And then they came back and they invited Zelensky to the White House. He came over there, and then we see the big blow up. And what they're bargaining for is Trump wants 50% of their rare earth minerals, of their minerals. 50% of that is worth way more than even $500 billion. In actuality, I would say we've probably sent them about $200 billion. You see some conflicting deals here, but let's give Trump the benefit of the doubt and say that we have sent them $500 billion in military assets and money or whatever. I don't know. We may never know the truth on that because the Defense Department has never passed an audit, right? But the fact is, let's just say it. Well, if we're taking 50% of Ukraine's rare earth minerals over time, and the more valuable those minerals get over time, those minerals can be worth trillions and trillions of dollars. That's a lot of money. That's not a fair deal. Trump himself would not ever agree to a deal that bad. As a matter of fact, he would be calling any administration that did agree to that kind of a deal, he would be calling them stupid. So he's making a business deal, but in the meantime, peace is not being made, and people are still losing their lives. And if you look at really what happened after the big blow up in the White House with Zelensky goes back to the Ukraine, and then all of a sudden Russia turns up their attacks on the Ukraine. They start turning up the heat. Well, it makes you kind of wonder why that happened, right? You know, did the United States and Russia come to some sort of an agreement to put the heat on Zelensky so that Trump can get his minerals deal? I don't know, guys. I'm just saying those are thoughts that cross my mind. Makes me think. Okay, guys, so in order to ask ourselves as Americans, and I'm an American, I live in the Philippines, but I'm an American. And like I said, I can look at this whole situation from a little bit different perspective. I've been living here in the Philippines for 4 years now, and I get a little bit different perspective because I am outside of the United States. And I have conversations with people, and I see different news outlets than most Americans, and so on and so forth, right? I can see things just a little bit different. And that's why I'm giving you my 2 cents on this. Who am I? I'm nobody. Again, I am nobody. I'm no expert. I'm not a political scientist. I'm not a historian. I'm not anything. I'm just a working class dude from Oklahoma that retired early and moved to the Philippines. That's all I am. But let's look at this with a little bit of common sense, okay? So the first thing I want to do is set the stage for you guys. I've got me some notes. So if you see me looking down here, that's what I'm doing. I'm reading my own notes. Let's set the stage. So Texas was the Republic of Texas many years ago. In other words, they were their own country. They were not part of the United States. That's why they're called the Lone Star State. Texas became its own country after it won its independence from Mexico in 1836. So Texas became its own country. It was the Lone Star country, the Lone Star State now that it's called. And if you still look at their flag, they're still using the same flag that they used when they were the Republic of Texas and not part of the United States. Their state flag is still their national flag. But they won their independence from the Mexicans during the Texas Revolution in 1836. 1836, think about that. You know, the United States didn't become a nation until 1776, right? Or that's when the Revolution was fought. But it was several years later before Texas won its independence from Mexico, and it was its own nation. And it was its own nation for almost 10 years. Just a little over 9 years, Texas was its own country. Well, it wasn't long after Texas became one of the United States that it actually seceded from the Union during the American Civil War. It joined the rest of the southern states and became part of the Confederate States of America during the War of Northern Aggression, during the American Civil War. So, in other words, they were again separated from the United States of America. They were part of the Confederate States of America. So a lot of you guys are going to be like, well, Tim, what does this have to do with anything? Well, now that I've kind of set the stage for you, let's go into a what-if scenario, right? So let's just say in 1991, when I was in college and all that good stuff there in Oklahoma, that it was the United States who started fumbling, who actually fell. And Texas was like, you know what, we don't want to have anything to do with this anymore. We're ready to be our own country again. And so they become the Republic of Texas once again. And I've made this statement before in conversations and so on, and people are like, well, that would never happen, Tim. That's stupid. You can't do that. Well, I'm just telling you the history of Texas. It very well could happen. In Texas, they've had recent questions on some of their state ballots asking the citizens whether they would want to be the Republic of Texas and secede from the United States. And one of the last ones, I think it was done in 2023 or 2022, I can't remember, the majority of the people wanted to leave. Now, are they going to do it? No. But I'm just saying that there is a growing number of Texans who want to secede from the United States. So could it happen? Absolutely, it could happen. And Texas wants to become its own sovereign country, right? Remember that. And remember the statements that I've talked about before where people said, well, any sovereign country should be able to join what organization they want, right? Now, let's also say that in 1991, it was the Soviet Union who got stronger. They didn't fall, they got stronger, right? Their economy was strong, their military strong, they're putting themselves all over the world and everything like that. So let's say that after 1991, we start seeing countries like Panama, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, Honduras, Guatemala, Mexico, all become trading partners, all become economic partners with the Soviet Union. And now they want the protection of the Warsaw Pact. And so they all start joining the Warsaw Pact. And this is after the Soviet Union, after Texas got her independence back. The Warsaw Pact made promises to the United States that, you know what, we are not going to move the Warsaw Pact 1 inch further north. We're not going further norte. But now, over the years, we've seen them get closer and closer and closer and closer. And now throw Canada into the mix. Let's just say they wanted to join too. But let's just leave Canada out of it right now. Now, after Mexico becomes part of the Warsaw Pact, the United States is getting a little spooked. Now, we still have our nukes, right? We still have our ability to wage war, but we're getting spooked because we're like, man, you know, one more country and they're on our borders. And so the United States says, no, you know, we're not going to tolerate the moving of the Warsaw Pact into Texas. It's just not going to happen. By the way, we want Houston. We want that port back. That's an important trading port for us. And so the United States sends troops and they take Houston and then the area around Houston back. And then there's this whole group of people that, you know, from Dallas to the Red River that, you know, they speak more like Oklahomans and they kind of relate to themselves as more of like an Okie or something like that. And I'm just kidding, guys. But let's just say that there is. And so the United States starts sending troops down, you know, as far down south as Dallas, Abilene, that kind of area. Let's just say they go ahead and take the Texas Panhandle. What would, you know, do you not think that the United States would do that? And then what would we say when people were screaming, well, wait a minute, you can't do that. Texas can become part of the Warsaw Pact if they want. They're their own sovereign nation. In the United States, we'd be going, no, we told you guys, you got to Mexico, that was far enough, but you guys wanted to take it a step further. Texas wants to become trading partners with China and Russia and the Soviet Union, and now they want to become part of the Warsaw Pact. I can guarantee you the United States would have invaded Texas a lot sooner than Putin invaded the Ukraine. I can guarantee you. And so, guys, ask yourself, are we being hypocrites as Americans? Is it because we are ignorant of world affairs? We're not looking at the history. We're not looking at what's gone on in the past. We're just watching rhetoric from, you know, and propaganda from mainstream media and all these other different sources that are definitely politically biased. You know, are we just watching that? Or are we trying to take things in consideration And are we looking at what would we do? Are we having empathy towards anybody else in this world and going, you know what? If we were in their shoes, we would do it too. Because we would. We would have done it sooner. We would have had a full-on invasion. And matter of fact, been taking parts of Mexico if it was the United States. That would be my prediction. So guys, ask yourself, are we doing the right thing here? Is this bargaining and using rare earth minerals to bargain out for the cost of lives and everything? I mean, is it all worth it? Is this collateral damage worth it for money? I don't think so. I don't think it's the right thing to do. The thing is, I watched this. He's an economist. He's a young economist. His name's Gary Stevenson, and I'll talk about him in some further videos. But he was a guy who grew up very poor in England, and he became a very wealthy trader for Citibank. And he talks about how the ultra wealthy, they tell you what you want to hear at the moment to get what they want. They all do it. He talks about this phenomenon, right? And if you look at the history of the United States with what we have done, that's exactly what we've done. We've told other countries, we've told smaller countries, we've told our allies even what they wanted to hear at the moment to get what we want. But that's not American. 95% of Americans still believe in the whole thing of, your word is your oath. Your word's all you have. And if nobody can trust your word, they can't trust you at all. But our leaders are showing the world something totally different. Just something to think about, right? All right, guys, I appreciate y'all watching yet another video. And stay tuned. I'll have another one out for you next week. And we'll see what else we can talk about. All right, I appreciate you guys tuning in. Oh, bye. If you don't mind, if you liked what I'm doing here, hit the thumbs up, subscribe if you want to. Again, this is a new channel. I'm trying to get her going. All right, guys, I appreciate it, and we'll catch you on the next video.